Right, now I see participants. All right, welcome people joining in. Right, thank you. All right, so we'll start in a few minutes, let people join in. I just opened the webinar and I'll we also include Dean Garrick here.
Hi, everybody.
All right, welcome, Randy. Thank you for being here, Dean Garrick.
Yeah, Randy's fine. Yeah, that's good. Veronica and Maria, have we met before?
I don't believe so.
Very nice to meet you.
Hello. Nice
Thanks
to
for
meet you as
joining us.
well.
Hello, Dean
It's been a
Urick.
pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, of course. Hank, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Dean Urick.
Pride of the Bulldogs right there.
All right, so as people are joining in, I guess because we are recording, we can start the conversation to be mindful of everybody's time. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, Rohit, I have to let you know that I'm on until 4:10. Then I have to go. I'm so very sorry.
No worries. I hope our guests are okay with that. Dean has a busy schedule today, but I've squeezed you in, Randy, early on, so you get a chance to say a few words and share with the audience before you leave.
I do appreciate, and I will engage individually with each of you if you like. Happy to do that. And you are recording. I'll go back and watch this and we can talk about your talk.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so let's start our session by our land acknowledgement. The Fresno State campus sits in the midst of San Joaquin Valley, a valley rich in the traditions and representation of Native American peoples and cultures. We are grateful to be in the traditional homelands of the Yokuts and Mono peoples, whose diverse tribal communities share stewardship over this land. As you are attending and are in the if you want to use the chat feature to share your comments and tell us a little bit about where you are coming from, you can also use this link to see what lands you're on. Well, mostly our audience is going to be from Fresno State, so I'm guessing we are talking about the same peoples, but if you are attending from elsewhere, feel free to use the link to see where you are. I am a settler on the occupied lands of Yokuts and Mono people. I'm Dr. Rohit Mehta, assistant professor in curriculum and instruction at Fresno State University. As I continue to think and act with this consciousness of being a settler, I invite everybody to join the process of thinking about decolonization. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion on the topic of digital equity. This is our first effort as the International Education Committee in the Kremen School of Education to begin a topic series that connects issues of race and inequity across educational disciplines, situating Fresno as an interconnected and inseparable part of international phenomenon. But before I introduce our guest speakers, I would like to invite Dean Garrick of Kremen School of Education and Human Development to say a few words and welcome our guests.
Yeah, I want to welcome the expertise that's here in the room, but I also want to thank Rohit and his team for bringing about this to my attention and saying we really need to do more for thinking about equity issues that go beyond Fresno, that go beyond the Valley. He is a very thoughtful scholar. He has engaged some very thoughtful people. I'm looking forward to hearing from them. I hope that you will all learn as much from them as I intend on learning from them. I will say also that that Dr. Rohit Mehta represents a collection of scholars at Fresno State who are all working for equity, diversity, social justice in our environment. And we do it in a variety of ways. And I will encourage you, I'm currently putting in the chat, I would encourage you to visit some of the scholars, the representation of many of these initiatives on a webpage that has just been launched for diversity, equity, and inclusion from Kremen. And you will find that there are a vast number of voices and expertise through which Kremen continues to have a rich conversation about what Kremen as a school within a larger university can do within the Valley to promote more relevant and rich conversations for change. We look around these days and we know that change is necessary. and it's Kremen's intention to be a part of any initiative that promotes anti-racist pedagogies, that promotes social justice in the community, that finds gaps and fills those gaps, whether we happen to do it by service or research. So I'm deeply indebted to the invitees that we have this evening, as well as those coming in the future events. But I want to thank you for not only coming and attending and listening, but want to thank again Rohit for kicking this all off. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dean Yerrick. Thank you for being here today. I would also like to give a quick shout out to the International Committee, Dr. Cecilia Mendoza, Dr. Myung Hwan Shin, Dr. Fei Chen, and Dr. Yasser Nur Dedeoglu, who made this this panel discussion possible. So thanks to everybody. On that note, let me introduce you to the guest speakers today. We are joined by 3 guest speakers from a range of disciplines and areas of expertise. In alphabetical order, please allow me to introduce you to Dr. Veronica Ahumada, who is an assistant professor of health informatics and human-robot interaction in the School of Medicine, Department of Pediatrics at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Ahumada's work is focused on the use of telerobots and interactive technologies for improved health and developmental outcomes. Her research encompasses strong interdisciplinary efforts between medicine, health informatics, robotics, computer science, learning sciences, and the technology industry. Welcome, Dr. Ahumada. Our next guest is Dr. Hank Gutierrez. Dr. Hank Gutierrez is currently the Deputy Superintendent at the Office of the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. He is Fresno State alum through and through, with a doctorate in K-12 education and leadership from Fresno State, graduating as the Kremen School of Education Dean's Medalist. As Dr. Gutierrez became the first Latino principal of Fowler High School, his alma mater, under his leadership, the school saw suspensions, expulsions, and conduct referrals decrease annually. And in 2015, the California Department of Education recognized Fowler High School as the California Gold Ribbon School. In his current work, he's launched Fresno County's first ever iPhone Android app for Fowler youth and homeless students to navigate A to G requirements and to personalize their connection toward the college pipeline. In addition, he has created the Teachers of Color Alliance for Educational Empowerment, a pipeline looking to guide African-American students into the teaching professions. It is Hank's passion for equitable student success, belief in all students, and his ability to foster social change through building positive relationships that has been the staple of his career. Welcome, Dr. Gutierrez.
Thank you.
Finally, we have joining us Dr. Murray Heath. Dr. Heath is an assistant professor of educational technology at Loyola University, Maryland, who has worked in the field of education for 20 years. Prior to her work in higher education, she taught high school social studies in Baltimore County Public Schools. Her public school teaching experiences influence her research. Dr. Heath believes that education broadly and public P-12 education specifically should foster dispositions and practices to develop a robust multiracial democracy, especially as democracies around the world face elevated challenges from rising authoritarianism, white supremacy, increased domestic terrorism, and unprecedented destruction of the environment. Dr. Heath uses her research and teaching to interrogate educational technology, confronts white supremacy, and advocate for teacher activism. She has published articles on technoethics and technoskepticism, social justice and education technology, and the social action and technology. She co-edits the CITE site Social Studies Journal and serves as a co-founder and co-chair of the Critical Theory in Teaching and Technology SIG for site conference, and co-facilitates the Civics of Technology project as well. Welcome, Dr. Heath. All right. So welcome all. Before we begin the conversation, I would like to acknowledge our audience. We have faculty, students, staff joining us. We'll also be recording the webinar for later viewing and archiving as a way to make sure that this becomes like a part of a key topic discussion for anyone to watch at later viewing. Welcome everyone. Please use Q&A feature to ask any questions to speakers. I will try and weave them in or ask them at the end of the conversation. I would keep the panel semi-structured and conversational. Speakers are welcome to build in on each other's comments and help co-construct a shared understanding for everyone on the topic. Right, so to the speakers, although I gave a quick introduction of your work, we would like to know more about your context that you're working in. So could you and we can go in alphabetical order, or whoever wants to jump in, or I can just call you out, but no pressure. Could you tell us a little bit about your context? Who are your students? What's your work like? Who does it serve, and how it connects with the issues of equity? Right, Dr. Gutierrez.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Again, my name is Hank Gutierrez. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening with all of you. My work spans the 32 districts, charter schools and faith-based school sites throughout Fresno County. So if you can imagine the county of Fresno, pretty expansive place, from the corners of Coalinga, just on the border of Monterey County, all the way to the orange fields in Orange Cove in the Reedley area. So it's quite an expansive place. K through 6 education, dealing with issues of, trying to combat, learning, online learning, in-class learning, trying to navigate this current time through COVID. But in essence, our office here at the Fresno County Office of Education is really partnering with schools, 32 districts, really partnering with schools to help them with accountability, fiscal oversight, and making sure that kids are learning at the highest level, whether that be digitally in our juvenile justice system or in-class learning.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. How about Dr. Ahumada? You share, because let's go Fresno, California.
Sure. So my work, my research is centered on actually medically homebound students. And so it's students who are on hospital and home instruction. And this is before COVID. And so we use telerobots for them to attend school. And I conduct research in Los Angeles Unified School District, surprisingly, Anne Arundel County schools, and Fairfax, Virginia, and a couple districts in Texas. So there's a nice sampling so that we can make sure what we find in California is not California specific. And so that way we can find commonalities and differences for how we use these technologies. And so these are children who have historically not been able to attend school due to a high risk to their health. So pretty much what we all experienced during COVID is their reality. So whether they have cancer, heart disease, kidney failure, attending a classroom full of 20 to 25 students, and risk of infection is too high. And so we put a robot in the classroom and they control it from home. And so during COVID, people kept asking, how are your students doing? And I'm like, actually, it's like, they're used to this. They know the online thing. The difference is the transition to a virtual environment. So they were logging in to control a robot in a physical organic environment. And now we're on an online platform. So where everything is digital and there isn't physical interaction, which is interesting that it's via a robot. So a completely different setting from a somewhat hybrid interaction to a completely synthetic online interaction that we all had during COVID. And so that's really the population of students that I work with.
Thank you. Dr. Heath?
Thanks. This was really, I feel like that was fascinating to follow. And now I'm gonna, I don't have cool robots in classrooms. My name is Dr. Marie Heath, and I am at Loyola University in Maryland. So I actually am occupying the land of the Piscataway people, which is over on the East Coast. So I'm like coming to you from 3 hours in the future. And also a lot colder here. It's 10 degrees outside right now. So I know. So I'm a little bit envious of the California time and weather for you. So my background, as Dr. Mehta shared, is in social studies education, although my degree is in educational technology. And so that sort of informs and influences my approach to technology and educational technology. So from my social studies background and my own personal beliefs, it really orients me to think and care deeply about citizenship and democracy, and ensuring robust multiracial democracy. So I'm often exploring ways that technology in education can be integrated more justly, and also exploring ways that our current approach to technology can potentially reinforce injustices. So I work with teachers a lot to engage in social actions for more just technology integration in their classrooms, in their personal lives, and in their school systems.
Thank you. So that's a good segue into the next question that I have for you. So jumping into the topic more explicitly, what can you tell us about digital equity? So perhaps how would you try and define it? How do you tackle it in your context, and how it relates to education? How about we start with Dr. Heath this time?
Sounds good, thank you. So I think that for me, the definition is often bigger than I think the way we usually talk about digital equity, which tends to focus on access. A lot of times we think of that access to technology and closing, you use the word digital divide a lot. Closing a digital divide would lead to more equitable practices. But I try to think about the potential of injustices that can be inherent in technology, and also think about them within the context of schools. So injustices that are inherent in schools. So for me, exploring digital inequity means looking at designs of technologies, and sometimes how power is embedded in a design of a technology that we might use in education, and maybe how it nudges our behavior or collects our data, and also interrogating our schools too, to see in what ways we might in schools be reinforcing systems of oppression that we want to change and dismantle. Knowing that schools aren't necessarily designed, they weren't designed to serve all children, even though now we want to serve all children. So I think about, for instance, like Class Dojo is a little technology that we use a lot of times in schools that it sort of divorces kids from their race. It has sort of raceless little avatars, and then we often use that teachers can use it to kind of mark down behaviors of kids. So if you're doing a good behavior, you get a point, and if you're doing a bad behavior, you could lose points. And so it ends up sort of quantifying behavior and normalizing certain behaviors like sitting quietly, or other things that we tend to actually, upon interrogation, are really white behaviors that we've normalized for school. And sometimes sometimes the technology is the problem, and sometimes schools are a problem, and sometimes the ways they go together are a problem. So I tend to look at and work with digital equity, meaning using the practices of technology in context, as well as the technology itself. And of course, also, I think we'll probably talk about this later, access itself. And I know that is a whole other sort of issue.
Dr. Ahumada, do you want to tackle the question next about how do you define digital equity? How do you tackle it in context, and how it relates to education?
Yes. Can I share my screen for just quickly?
Yes,
Because I actually have a slide. So let's see if I can do this. Is this working?
yes.
Can you all see it? Unfortunately, where's the presentation one? Down here? So, when I think of digital equity, I approach it more from a health equity type lens. And so, we have these socio-cultural determinants, which we're all familiar with, which happen in organic environments when students are in class, right? And so we have this traditional lens of socio-cultural determinants of education or learning. But whenever we have a technology come in and we have this tech-mediated environment, it kind of takes a step back, and now we're looking at contextual determinants. And so these two extra layers, right? So we have structural determinants, which are external, which are indirectly correlated with education. And this would be technologies. Your Chromebook's broken. What are you using? An iPad, a phone, Wi-Fi access that Dr. Heath mentioned, learning resources, materials, et cetera. And then we have internal determinants that come along with the use of the technology. So tech literacy, your processes, for example, behavioral self-regulation. Do you believe you can do it? Do you learn differently? And the technology is not facilitating that. And then we also have situational determinants, which would kind of be outside of the student's control. Classroom management. Did we just take 25 students from a physical classroom and now there's 25 students online still with only one teacher? Education policies vary, district guidelines. Now, all of a sudden, when we move to this online platform for digital equity, your housing matters. Do you have a quiet place to learn and access school? Food matters, right? When we have free and reduced price lunch, if children were getting their meals from the school, when you are at home, it matters now. Where are you getting food? And do you have family support for your learning? During COVID, your situational determinants at school and home kind of became one. So when I look at digital equity, again, just approaching it from a health equity frame, these are also frameworks that we see in healthcare, where all of these things, once we put that layer of technology into what used to be an organic interaction, we've kind of amplified the things that can get in the way of the learning. And now let me end my show and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez.
Yeah, just piggybacking on what both Maria and Veronica said, you know, here in the Central Valley, in particular, in some of our very, very rural areas of the Central Valley and the most impoverished urban areas, we really saw the digital equity experience basically just become illuminated. I will just put it like that. You know, we have students in our lower socioeconomic environments, whether it's urban or rural. And I think a lot of times in education, we take for granted what kind of infrastructure the students' housing, perhaps where their neighborhood or their housing complexes. We sometimes in education give a simple assignment, whether that's on Google Docs, whether that's something to look up on YouTube, and we maybe sometimes take for granted that the students have the high-speed internet, the Wi-Fi, and the access to just the sheer power of the Chromebooks that we're sending them home with. We saw that just illuminated when we shifted to online learning with COVID. Cellular data. So one of the things we learned throughout the pandemic, especially early on in the pandemic, and I'm talking 15 months ago, was everybody's answer was, well, let's just send the kids home and with a hotspot. If they have a hotspot, everybody will be fine. Well, what we learned was that giving them a hotspot was great, but if they didn't have the cellular data, high-speed data at their housing complex or where their neighborhood was, that hotspot really did not help at all. And so unfortunately, we learned as we went with regards to the digital inequities of some of our students that live in some of our most impoverished neighborhoods. We're now starting to work very closely with local companies and cellular companies and internet companies so that we can bring some of those experiences up to speed. But we learned the hard way. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it at all here in Fresno County. We learned the hard way that digital equity was always there. COVID just illuminated that. And digital equity is unlike, it's no different than any other inequity. Veronica mentioned food access, and that was a glaring problem early on in the pandemic, but we figured that out here in Fresno County. But broadband, public Wi-Fi, cellular data, those were just all illuminated when the pandemic hit us.
So you already kind of helped see us the not difference, but similarities between pre-COVID and COVID inequity, right? Like how it just threw light on what was already there. I'm wondering if like other speakers also want to kind of talk about the before and after times, right? What changes did you see in terms of how the students were being impacted, or did you see any changes at all?
I think one of the biggest changes that I saw, so, and we talked about this before we started the panel, right? So one of the biggest changes that I saw during COVID is in California, it waffled between 65 and 70% of COVID-19 fatalities in the 18 to 64 age group affected the Hispanic Latino community. So that's huge. We're only 40% of the population, but we make up close to 70% of the COVID-19 deaths. And this is 18 to 64. This is not older. And so that's someone's parent, uncle, cousin, sibling. And so, you know, it's not a digital thing, but the impact of that and children doing childcare, perhaps not having, you know, the freedom to learn with illness and with this extremely high death rate, I think it's going to impact learning and achievement, because it's a community that just got hit so hard with COVID. They were not in school, they're online. And so you've lost some social supports, right? For your teacher, your peers, you were home, a bit isolated while all this was happening. And so I don't know, when we have the 100% digital environment, if we were able to fully see the impact of that. And I don't know when we'll see the effects, you know, in the schools. And I actually haven't heard too many people talk about it, but I know I follow the California Department of Public Health, and I'm always tracking it because I'm just horrified. And it has remained consistent throughout COVID. So it's something that, as we have these surges, the number has remained pretty consistent there.
Yeah, thanks. I would just echo both of those comments from the other panelists, that and I think it kind of illustrates the way that, like, we think technology can be a solution, right? So if we get students Wi-Fi, then we can do this thing. That's the thing we need to do, is like get them the Wi-Fi. And then we found, like, when we got them the hotspots, it still didn't necessarily do the thing, because there are all of these other systems at play. And where I live in Baltimore, we're an incredibly segregated region. So Baltimore County is a majority Black county now, has had a demographic shift with a rising Latinx population, and the white people in the county live sort of separate places than people of color in the county. And so there was a divide even among the county between parents who wanted their children back in school because they had not experienced COVID, and families who experienced devastating loss from COVID and had a whole different perspective on why they were not in school in a face-to-face learning environment. And then there were also students, like Veronica mentioned, who were sort of just lost, that teachers that didn't come to class, log on for many reasons, but were unable to be reached by the schools, by their teachers, by the social services that will go out to houses. So there's this combination of both technology, but also reinforcing and representing and reminding us of systems that already exist, which drive the inequality already.
I like the way you said that, Dr. Heath. I think people were living very different COVIDs. And so these lived experiences will be coming back into the classroom, whether COVID was just a super boring time for you or a super tragic time.
Yeah, and I think our K-12 teachers learned a lot through COVID. And one of them was those learning environments that you speak of. And I'll give you an example. I spoke to a kindergarten teacher just a couple weeks ago, and during COVID, she would be teaching over Zoom and following, her lesson plan as best she could. And this one little gal would not open her camera, and come to find out that she didn't want to open her camera because she didn't want the teacher and the rest of her classmates to see that her grandmother was sleeping on the couch behind her, because that was her only learning environment in the household. So like I said, this digital equity, or call it what you want, the digital divide or COVID learning environments, all it did was illuminate some of the inequities that our students are experiencing here in Fresno County. But we are doing the best we can as a county office of education to collaborate with the Fresno County Department of Public Health and the County of Fresno. We just launched a partnership 3 years ago, pre-COVID, but it's now coming to almost its fifth year next year, in that we're trying to partner with every school district. On our charge is to have a behavioral health clinician and school psychologists in every school in our county, so that we can, now that the kids are coming off and having experienced death, as Veronica said, so unfortunately, they're coming back to our campuses, not just with the effects of the digital divide, but the effects of just having gone through trauma and gone through many avenues of trauma. So we're doing our part to get clinical and behavioral psychologists on every school in the county, and it's working out beautifully as we speak.
I think that's great. This whole topic, it's like a 2-year long and ongoing natural disaster. And the only life raft that could be thrown out there was digital. It couldn't possibly have sustained everyone. But I think what's interesting is what we've learned from it, right? The things
Absolutely.
that have surfaced.
But it's very unique in what Maurice said about this dance. It's a delicate dance between the digital aspect of our world and the way and where our world is moving to be dependent on that digital world. And I think teachers, now that kids are back in the classrooms, I, for one, have witnessed that teachers are more skilled in that balance, going back to the pedagogical practices and fundamental pedagogical practices, face-to-face learning, and collaboration in class, to now also being able to have that digital tool in their back pocket. I have seen teachers galvanize that balance.
Yay, yes. So in my research pre-COVID, I had teachers who were like, I don't want a robot in the classroom. I don't want people watching me. I don't like to be on screen. I'm not good with technology. And there was a lot of resistance. And in order for a child to use a robot in school, we had to have family support. The child had to want to do it. The teacher had to be comfortable doing it. So in order for this virtual inclusion to happen, we needed everyone to have buy-in. And I can't tell you the number of teachers that just were like, I'm overloaded, I can't. The digital, no, I don't want a screen. People can hear me and I'm not used to talking. Now, everyone had to do it. And so I'm expecting that this barrier has been at least minimized. Hopeful.
Thank you for love and appreciate when we start volunteering and start contributing organically. We've been kind of alluding to it a little bit, and I also want to make sure that we become more explicit in anti-racist practices. When I talk about race a little bit more explicitly, so could you share a little bit about, in your work and experience, how online education, and you already talked about this, but in perhaps more detail, how it impacted students of color or teachers of color in particular?
Well, if it's okay, I'd like to share a tool that I helped launch here at the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. Just as the pandemic was hitting, we didn't really have an idea of how long kids would be out of school. We didn't really know if it was 2 weeks, are we going to be a year? And I had always had a dream to create this, and I'll share it with the audience. It is called the Educational Resource Guide. This is an app that our office created, and I'll just share this with everybody. This app will be launched in about 3 weeks. It's called the iPlan Educational Resource Guide, and it specifically was created for foster youth and homeless students. Very vulnerable student population here in Fresno County. When you open up the app, and this is for iPhone or Android, when you open up the app, you can click on 3 main areas. So I'll just start with educational resources, and hopefully you can all see that. So as the student is navigating their time through school, they can click on this app, and they can take a look at college preparation guidelines. And depending on their grade level, so I'll just pick, 9th grade. So I'm a 9th grader, and I want to see, what my college A through G requirements are. So I'll go and I can help advocate for myself. And as a 9th grade student, I can attend an orientation at my new school, and I got to make sure that I do that. So I can click on that and take care of that. I got to meet with my high school counselor each semester. And so when the child does that, they can click off of that. So it's almost a self navigation here. The other thing I like is, if I'm a foster youth and homeless student, I'm very transient at times. I may be in one high school my freshman year. I might also be in another high school my sophomore year. So I wanted to make sure that all of our students had their contacts, so they can look on one click, depending on what school they go to. If they go to Fowler Unified, they know that Mr. Rick Romero is their advocate and their contact. There's an email and there's a phone number. If they switch school districts and they end up in Mendota Unified, they know that Jose Ochoa and Esther Cuevas are their advocates, and they can click an email and they have a phone number. I also like again, I like the checklist, because I want to make sure that all of our kids know their college preparation checklist. So 10th grade, different than 9th grade, obviously. So if I'm in 10th grade, I want to make sure that I talk to my guardian or my supportive adult in my life, whether that's at a group home or in my family structure. So I want to make sure I talk to them, make sure they know about my high school graduation and college entrance requirements. I can check that off. I may want to visit a college campus or attend college fairs, so I'm going to click that off. And then here's my calendar. My calendar is going to show me my to-do list, my senior year to-do list, my 9th through 11th grade to-do list. And I can click on the calendar and I can make special arrangements for myself. And we really think this can be a game changer for some of our most vulnerable populations. But this is a really good app for any student to have at their fingertips for just navigating their time in order to get through high school and into college.
That is a great app.
Thank
To
you.
provide that scaffolding. Well, and I do think that is one of the strengths of a digital platform. So many low-income families, their internet access, they don't necessarily have broadband, because that's a very high monthly bill, right? The pirates at the cable company, it's expensive. And so the access is through smartphones, right? So if you have an app that you can navigate via the smartphone and get kind of that structure and that scaffolding, I think it will be a game changer. That is a fantastic app.
Thank you. And that, but again, there's that balance that Marie talked about. It's that dance between making sure we have something available, but at the same time, we understand that that child may not have a cell phone, but if they don't, then they can use it on their computer, just as I showed you on my desktop. So it's an app for the phone, but it's also something that they have access to on their computer. And I'm going to share the link. The link that I'm about to put in the chat is the link that I just shared with you all, but it's in like the I don't know what they call it. It's in the phase right now where it's just developmental phase. So you can click on this link that I'm putting in the chat, and it'll just show you what I just showed you. It's not complete. It's just the demonstration phase. But hopefully you all can take a look at it, and I'll let everybody know. When the app is ready to be downloaded on your phone, I'll share the information with Rohit, and he can share out with our audience.
Certainly, that's definitely a resource people would like to have access to. Yeah, Dr. Heath, would you like to add?
I kind of forgot the question as I was looking at the app. Could you repeat it?
I was wondering. Just being more explicit in terms of thinking about race in this issue, right? So could you share a little bit about how online education particularly have impacted students of color or even teachers of color? Because we're talking about students a lot, we also want to make sure teachers are included.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've been researching and learning about students during the pandemic, and particularly during the online portion of online learning for students of color, was that we sort of we did the best we could to simulate school, which was great. Like I'm thankful that technology existed to allow students and teachers to remain in contact, but it was like almost kind of like the worst parts of school that we simulated and not the best parts. And so we simulated sort of a teacher. Hank was talking about the pedagogies that got lost. And I think that the ways that, for instance, Google Classrooms or Zoom are set up are not immediately conducive to kind of social learning. They're conducive to like me talking to you and me being the knowledge keeper and you being the knowledge getter, and none of those sort of like wraparound services that are in schools or the social element of schools. And instead, it was a lot of the sort of linear assumptions about knowledge. It was a lot of like forcing families to become the, any harms that were happening in school are now harms that are like we brought school into your house, and now like, families have to be the ones to make sure that you're there and are somehow responsible for you in a way that normally happens in a school. So the parents and caregivers are taking a different kind of approach with their children. And so I think that sort of things that we're trying to change about schools were the part of schools somehow that got continued. And the things that we've been so incredibly innovative with schools were the things that we lost during this time of the pandemic. And so I think that that disproportionately harms students of color. I am not a teacher of color, but I work with particularly I work with a lot of Black teachers, and the mostly Black women who are just very exhausted from their experiences. So I don't want to like speak on behalf of folks, but I will say that the sort of just the rapid rate at which my Black colleagues are exhausted and sort of feeling the need to either leave the profession or not, feeling like they cannot continue in the capacity that they're in has been, I think, really, I think will be devastating for the field. And this is just an aside, this is me like thinking out loud. We've seen historically, like after Brown, there was a forcing out of Black teachers from education. So, and we lost a lot of teachers of color after Brown, and the teaching force became white and female after that. And I wonder about, this is again, like literally just something I'm thinking about right now, the ways we know that teachers are leaving because they're tired. I wonder about the ways that this is gonna disproportionately impact the demographics of the teaching force too.
Hey, wow. I know you're just thinking about that out loud, but now I'm thinking about that too. And it again goes back to like what we have been touching base on, like the similarities between inequities before COVID and how they were kind of exacerbated because of the pandemic, and now we just know how worse they are. I hope I'm not putting on spot, but I would like to hear or think about more examples, like specific examples of like what that looks like in the reality of our students and teachers when we say that there's inequities that have always been there. Could you share like some examples that you've explored through your own work in terms of what they were and how they became worse? Kind of digging a little bit deeper. Who wants to go first? Marie, it seems like you have something.
No, I wasn't sure if you were asking that of me or of all of us.
All of us. Yeah.
Well, I think perception-wise, you know, if there was ever an inequity that had maybe spawned new inequities or made things worse, it could just become an issue of perceptions, whether that's a teacher or a school administrator seeing that, well, you know, you see, I knew we couldn't teach on that platform because I knew those kids couldn't handle this learning environment. And see, here we go. You know, what we saw through COVID is just, you know, exactly what we thought before, and that we can't give these kids these high level teaching assignments and classroom project expectations, because you see what happened, you know. And so if there was ever any impacting or existing new inequities, I would almost venture to say that it would just be the exacerbation of some of those lowered expectations that were there in the first place. And what we do know is that students of color and foster youth and homeless students can learn at the highest levels. And so what I meant when I said before about the going back to the fundamental teaching and pedagogical strategies in the classroom is that we know that if I'm a school administrator right now, my lens of equity is clearer than it's ever been before. And what I mean by that is, yes, we can give our kids, all kids, and especially kids of color, yes, we can give our kids the pedagogical practices and the in-class learning environment to the highest level with the highest sophistication of technology. But what our equity lens needs to tell us now is, unless you have walked in that child's house and unless you have spoken to that child's parents and know what kind of infrastructure and technology they have capabilities within their household, you cannot send that child home setting them up for failure by giving them an assignment that has a digital component that they have no control over. And so those experiences need to be facilitated within the walls of your classroom and not automatically expected to happen at their homes. Our kids can't, a second grade child cannot control what kind of infrastructure and digital capabilities they have at their house. So that therefore we cannot expect them to go home and do something at home and from a learning platform that their infrastructure just can't handle. And that's what I meant earlier when, if you're gonna have a pedagogical structure that is with the highest expectations, which it should be for all of our kids because they can learn, then you just need to navigate whether that needs to happen within the four walls of your class or whether that needs to take place at some independent learning at home. But if you're not 100% certain that that child's going to be able to go home and perform that on their digital platform, then don't assign it, because you're setting them up for failure. And when they get back to school the next day and 75% of the kids were able to complete it and 25% weren't, that's not the child's fault. And so that's the lens of equity that I think many of our school administrators in K-12 have learned.
I agree. So what you're describing are those situational determinants, right? The home environment. And when we look at rolling out technology, we have to understand there's a whole different context than the classroom. There are different forces at play especially when you send home technology assignments and expect them to be done. Not everyone has a parent who has the tools, the resources, the time, or the energy to help them. One of the things that I have seen in my research and in classroom environments, technology's primary effect is to like amplify human forces, right? So it amplifies everything. And when you talk about a second grader, right, they have this natural propensity to learn and play and grow, but they also kind of have this natural desire to distract themselves. And so it takes supervision, and teachers will tell you in the classroom, right, they get easily distracted. And if you don't have the same type of firewall protections on whatever you're sending home, you can't ensure that the child is going to stay focused on whatever learning you have sent home. Because at school, we have a lot of different safety measures, right? So when I think of equity, I think of all of those things. You can't take one environment and think, oh, that'll happen. We'll just replicate that at home. It doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen in all situations.
Yeah, I think that I would echo the other panelists in that I think illumination, I think Hank said this too, that it's it's not like that inequities didn't exist. It was that folks like who are empowered just ignored it or had been able to ignore it, right, for a while. And so it makes it harder to ignore because you've seen you begin to understand like why, hopefully I'll say it, why a student has a camera off or why a student can't complete an activity because a parent is working or or is on is doing shift work and is still sleeping or whatever the situation might be. It's harder. I think that home life perhaps. So maybe the flip side, the other side of the coin is for teachers and who had not like thought about individual students as they went home, and then like now you're in their living room, so you have, and maybe that will be sort of the portal to the next thing.
We kind of also have this outdated mindset that technology will free up your time. And I think that technology in educational settings, like you actually need more humans. For every device or online activity, you actually need more humans to troubleshoot. Or you have children who are sitting there saying, I can't get on. I mean, it happens in our work, right? The poor IT department. And so when this idea and so everyone will just be responsible for doing it online. You actually need more adults. Like you need more adult supervision, more adult assistance, because the technology fails. It's actually not that great. There are glitches, lags, loops, lost the assignment. I uploaded it. Here's the proof. Oh, it's gone now. Right. And these are all frustrations that one teacher per 25 kids, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I'm also, as I'm thinking of all the things and the connections between the three different contexts and how similar yet different they are, and I'm thinking about way forward. We've been in this situation for what, technically 2 years, but it seems way longer than that. In your experience so far, as you are in that situation, present, like tackling with this, What recommendations do you have for other practitioners, scholars, perhaps suggestions for policy or practice, suggestions for research that you may have?
Well, speaking from the county office perspective, you know, we over the past probably 7 to 8 months, much of our focus has been working on writing policies, working with the California Department of Ed, so that we can see the opportunities for grants, the opportunities for allotment of funds at the governor's level to build towers in our more rural areas. I did not know this, but it basically, to build a tower in a rural area, but you got to remember, when you build a tower in a rural area, you may have households that go to the same school district for, I'll just use a community like Firebaugh, for example. Josh Allen, who's quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, came from Firebaugh. So I'll use Firebaugh as an example. You can build a tower in Firebaugh, but that tower, wherever you place it, may not even touch a house that's 5-10 miles away, but yet, so you don't have a dense population is what I'm trying to explain. And that is where we're trying to work with these companies that builds towers so that we can put high-speed internet into these homes. And so it's not just a money financial issue, it's also a technology within a technology issue, if that makes sense. So we're lobbying with the state of California so that the governor can put money into those areas. But on a classroom to classroom focus, we're also working with the teachers that we have in our professional development sessions for instructional technology. We are working on those, getting back to the fundamentals of pedagogy, where it is a collaborative effort so that kids can get back to, yes, they're using technology in the classroom, but they're also getting back to the networking and the collaboration, social justice issues and social political conscious issues, which ironically is a topic that high school teachers and middle school teachers can talk about with kids to explore an issue like digital equity, which is a socio-political conscious effort, which is in the realm of culturally responsive teaching.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to jump in because that's a perfect segue to my lens, which is that socio-political lens of technology over, we know that technology fits within all of that and that digital access fits within all of that. So I loved hearing about the struggle, the sort of like on the ground struggles of technology as a needed solution, but still a problem, like still a solution with needing a solution within its solution. And then thinking about, so from my sort of humanities lens, thinking about technology as encouraging students to come at it from that. So like, what is the context of the technology and why do we think of it often as a solution when sometimes it actually, it allows us to put blinders on to see, if we assume that technology can solve a problem, then we are ignoring the systems that are already entrenched that are causing the problem. And so it allows us to kind of bypass conversations of justice and just say like, oh, I just got the silver bullet and it'll solve it. So from my perspective going forward, we would teach more about technologies and thinking about them like through historical lenses, through current lenses. And I really like, I'm going to share the Detroit Community Technology Project is a sort of citizen-based project from people living in Detroit who question and work for technology for justice in Detroit and push back a bit against ways that technologies have been used to oppress the people of Detroit. And so recently, for instance, they had a whole collective movement to kind of democratize and push back against facial recognition cameras there. So they've got a principles list. Whoops, I thought I copied and pasted it. Let me try it over here, put it in the chat. Hold on, I want to make sure it goes to everybody. There we go, sorry. And that link goes to a bunch of digital principles that they have for justice. So it's access and participation and common ownership and healthy communities. So they think about technology within the context of society, which that's sort of my own lens. And so I really appreciate that. And I see that as a way forward for us.
Kind of building on that, one of the things we can't ignore when we're looking at digital equity is the role of industry, right? So we all had to go on Zoom and Microsoft and several other platforms out of an emergency situation. Before COVID, I could not use Zoom, and the school districts I worked with couldn't use Zoom. You needed to be 13 years old. And so we couldn't use it in elementary schools because they sell your data. They sell the data and your information. So with COVID, everybody went on Zoom anyway. It was what we had. And so there was a lot of emergency use of technology. But I think what we've learned moving forward is we must have kind of a deliberate allocation of high quality adult supervision of the technology. And we must be knowledgeable. You know, the towers are difficult because who owns the tower? Who has the right to use the tower, right? We have big players. We have Verizon. We have your cell phone people. You know, when I worked in Montana, the towers are owned. And so who has access to the signal from there? So there's huge policies, right? State policies, federal policies, and same with the technologies that are sold to districts. Who profits? What happens with the data? And that to me is also a part of equity. Are you using facial recognition, right? So this is sold now, your phone, you can turn it on. And when something is free, you are the product. And so recognizing that for our students, nothing is actually really free. And so building in protections to make sure that, child rights and ethics are involved in our technology plan. We're all super, super knowledgeable now, and we had to become that. But we can use that as we move forward to come about in a more thoughtful way on how we use technology in the classroom.
Hey, you all are making me think of trying to connect the dots together, and this being like an initiative by the International Education Committee. And also given my own work and positionality, I can't help but think of global context. The technologies that we're talking about needs material, right? Material comes from the planet. There's some mine somewhere so that we can get the lithium for our batteries, get the cobalt for our batteries, right? Democratic Republic of Congo is a big cobalt mine. Child labor. They dig for the cobalt that goes into the batteries that we can use the mobile phone to provide education and support, right? All the things that we do. So this is all tied with this global socio-political context that we are a part of. So you're all making me think of all these connections and how it ties to the work with the decolonization efforts that we're thinking of, our relationship with the land, right? How we need more sustainable ways and sustainable technologies out of it that don't rely on the land that much in terms of exploiting it to that extent, right? So it's all interconnected together. I also have a question popping up from the audience, which is also a very important question that we haven't touched on yet. So serving students with extensive support needs is challenging without a pandemic. This is a question from Dr. William Garnett, who's a faculty in LEPC department, that's literacy, early education, and special education. So he's asking, serving students with extensive support needs is challenging without a pandemic. What have you learned about serving students in all of this who need one-on-one support or even two-on-one levels of support, and who gets that kind of support? It's a really important question, I feel. Whoever wants to tackle, perhaps. Yes, Dr. Gutierrez.
That's a great question because we're still learning. We are literally still digging out what are the best practices for those kids who are high needs, medically fragile students. And yes, they may have a one-on-one support, they may have a two-on-one support. What specific areas does the paraeducator tackle, and what specific areas does the teacher tackle? And I wish I had the right answers, and I wish I had a succinct answer. But like I said, we were faced with a situation that we never anticipated with COVID, and our most medically fragile kids could literally not come on campus. And so we were Zooming if we could, we were Zooming with parents if we could, and we are now in the midst of figuring out what are the best pedagogical practices for students who are faced with either specific learning disabilities or medically fragile kids. We are literally rewriting the book, so to speak, on those type of practices.
I work with the Mind Institute at UC Davis. I have a joint appointment there, and we work with neurodiverse children. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from COVID that I hope we can communicate is that just because you're a parent doesn't mean you're a teacher. You know, teachers are highly trained. And so when we look at children who have a high level of needs and had a high level of educational supports before COVID, a parent couldn't do it all, right? And so we talked about amplification. Natural disasters also disproportionately impact people who rely on those support systems. And we expected parents to do everything. And there's no way, you know, people are trained. These are skilled professionals that work with your children. And so that was a challenge. And again, I don't have answers. I just know that is just something I hope people understand. Teachers are highly trained, you know, and it was a big expectation. There was nothing else we could do for parents to become teachers. And the same, just because you have a child with a high level of needs doesn't mean you're an expert in it, right? You're a great parent, but you are not necessarily, you know, feeling like you can do everything for your child. So that was tough, and we're working on it for the future.
Yeah, we just received, so obviously in 1920, standardized testing were suspended for K-12, you know, special ed students and for all students. And then in 2021, for those students who were able to test and who were not out on home hospital, we did receive results. And so one of the things I want to do with our office, we have 3 special ed sites that we run in our SELPA, is taking those standards, the California Alternative Assessment Standards, and really looking deep into where now that we have some results, even though they're standalone data, where can we tackle this question? This question fits perfectly, and I'm going to email this question to my directors in the special ed department. Where does this question lie within the standards that we're held to with regards to the reflection of student test scores that we receive for this coming spring? Because we will compare this coming spring's test scores to the ones we received just a couple months ago. And so I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Dr. Heath, I just don't want to leave you out, but also don't want to put you on spot if you want.
Oh, that's all right. For me, I feel like the question is probably beyond the scope of my expertise. It's because I don't have a research expertise in students who have specific needs of like 1 and 1 and 2-to-1 support. So I don't feel like I would contribute anything besides what's already been done.
Thank you. Yeah, we have one more question, and obviously from Dr. Myung-Hwan Shin. He's asking a very pragmatic question. What suggestions would you give to pre and in-service teachers to mitigate digital inequity under the ongoing systemic oppression? What should teachers need to do every day in their classrooms to kind of tackle this? Dr. Gutierrez, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what I kind of explained earlier with regards to the biggest suggestion I would give, and this only comes because of my experience as a site principal, the biggest advice, or I guess to answer the question more succinctly for up and coming or new teachers, is to really hone in on what are your baseline everyday lesson design strategies. Because if you can keep a consistent lesson design strategy built with those fundamental pedagogical skills and build in some equity with regards to digital experiences in your classroom. Because remember, as a brand new teacher, or even a veteran teacher, the only thing you can really control is what happens in your four walls of your classroom. You cannot control a student's learning environment or learning capabilities when they get home. They may be babysitting their brothers and sisters all night. They may not be able to have a parent help them when they get home. So I would just tell you, as a new teacher, you can only control what happens within your four walls and the baseline lesson design structure. And I'll send a lesson template to Dr. Mehta afterwards. I can't attach it to this, but give yourself the opportunity to really hone your lesson design strategies. And I will send it to Dr. Mehta as we speak, and maybe he can insert it into the chat.
I like that question, because although I'm not in teacher preparation technically right now, I spent a lot of time in teacher preparation, and I'm working when I was in the county as a mentor with teachers, and being a pre-service and new teacher is hard, and there are a lot of things to think about. But I think pragmatically, making sure that part of your preparation includes culturally responsive pedagogies and learning anti-racist practices and doing your own identity work, like how you fit into all of that. And then thinking, when I use technology, like I still use those practices. So it's not like all of a sudden you've got a tool and it's just a cool thing you do, and it's divorced from all that. It's part of that whole fabric and context of the classroom. So all of those practices that you've learned in your teacher preparation programs still come to bear when you use technology, and you have to like remember to use it, because sometimes we think like technology is like just a little tool, but it is actually really powerful, and the ways and practices we use it can either harm kids or help kids. So I would say, like, use the preparation you've got, and then just be mindful as you're using the technology that you're using it in the ways that you know are just and equitable.
You never want to make sure, Dr. Ahumada, do you want to add something? Also, we want to put you on spot.
No, I agree. You know, we covered that technology just amplifies human forces, and the technologies will change. You know, 25 years ago, we didn't have iPads. Platforms will change, but what doesn't change is our approach. And so if you approach teaching from a social justice lens and you're focused on equity, as different technologies evolve and enter your classroom, you'll be able to transition what you believe and how you approach students and learning through the technology.
Thank you. I have one more question from Dr. Cecilia Mendoza. The panel has identified how technology has either been an added value or not. Another subgroup are the language minority students who have to navigate both language development and learning content. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Some of the teachers that I've worked with have sort of done technology audits of the ways that video conferencing can is difficult for students who are like emergent English language learners, because they have not been able to, like, it's just not the same as speaking together. And they also have looked at ways that they've lobbied the technology companies for translate options and closed captioning options, which have come on board on the technologies. But I'm not sure if that was part, if the question was there. Oops, I lost it. I was looking for the question. Who have to navigate both language development and learning content. So I'm not sure if that is getting at what the person was asking or not, if that was where they were coming.
Well, I think in the K-12 world, and this goes to Dr. Cecilia Mendoza's question, is that, again, going back to those fundamentals of your lesson design and how much are we really tapping into a student's prior knowledge? How much are we really appreciating the fact that that student is a second language learner and using that first language to really enhance and catapult their learning into the new content or into the content, whether that be English language arts or science, and using technology in today's world with so many different apps and so many different tools. It's really up to that individual teacher to see how am I addressing the fact that I can actually use that student's first language to catapult learning into the second language, no matter what the content area is. But unless you're using that lens of equity, and then unless you're really taking into account that student's first language is really an asset versus a deficit, then you're not going to be able to do that. And I see Dr. Rohit has inserted my lesson design. I would really advise any new teacher to take a look at that lesson design practice.
I'd like to weigh in on the language minority. I started school, I only spoke Spanish, and I had to learn it, and I'm old, so they just threw me in, and I do not even remember learning English. I just knew everybody sounded like the adults on Charlie Brown. Do you remember that, when they're like, wah, wah, wah? And then eventually it all made sense. And so horrible. And then as soon as you learned, you had to start translating for your parents. And so one of the things that, and just FYI, way back in the day, I was a high school English teacher, is really working on not making students the translators. That is a burden above and beyond. And so then the other thing that we do with technology is make them your computer science teacher, to teach you how to, this reliance on the app, and you can register your kids online. Well, if you are in a home where you're teaching your parents all these things, now you're helping your parents. Do you see what I mean? So we take this digital, it'll be easy for everyone. And recognizing that if the child is translating for their parents, they might be having to help them navigate all the online stuff too. And it is a very, very heavy load for a child. And so then how do they learning content, right? And so we talk about this freedom to learn. And if your reliance on technology is one size fits all, you sometimes tie up that child's freedom to learn. Great question, Dr. Mendoza.
Yeah, great questions, all of them. Thank you for the audience for participating in the questions. We are running close to the 90-minute cap that I had in mind. So I have one question that I kind of wanted to ask at the end. So I know I can speak with confidence that I can say that about all three of you, that you are passionate about the work that you do. So what do you look forward to now in terms of what do you want to tackle in the coming future in your work?
I look forward to getting more African-American teachers in the workforce here in Fresno County, and I'm working very closely with the Kremen School of Education and Central Unified School District here. We need more African-American teachers, and we feel like we have a very solid plan, a very solid pipeline in partnership with both higher ed and K-12 to make that happen. That is I would call that my effort to, in my career, seeing African-American kids increased every year coming out of the Kremen School of Education with teaching credentials and Masters of Arts degrees to be administrators and principals and superintendents.
Thank you for sharing that. Same question. What do you look forward to tackling in your work?
I look forward to increased awareness and understanding of students who are facing medical challenges and allowing them to transition in and out of the classroom without either having to go solid homebound and then solid back in. We've already kind of had this transitional thing, and I hope we're just a little more understanding that even once the pandemic has become endemic, we'll still have that sliding kind of like a scale, right, of when it is safe for you to be in the classroom or not. And an increased acceptance and use of assistive technology with culturally appropriate approaches so that we don't say your camera must be on at all times. So all of that. And world peace.
I also I'm looking forward to working on civics of technology, so beginning sort of the practice of thinking about technologies within their socio-political context, having teachers figure out ways to teach that in classes so that our young citizens are thinking about that as they move about their communities and make decisions in their communities and act in their communities and start to think about the ways that technology in their lives kind of broadly, like beyond educational technology, although that's a great way in, can constrain or can support the continuation of our democracy. So that's kind of where I like figuring out the curriculum and doing that.
Thank you so much. This went by faster than I thought, and I could not have imagined a better panel to be doing this discussion with all of you. Wow. Thanks to all the people who could attend. We'll be recording that. We have recorded this. I'm gonna make sure that I continue sharing this with all teachers in and outside of Kremen, and we can use this as a resource. Feel free to use this as content in classroom for students to watch. This is powerful stuff right here. So thanks again to the wonderful panelists, Dr. Veronica Ahumada from UC Davis, Dr. Gutierrez from Fresno County, and Dr. Murray Heath from Loyola University of Maryland. Thank you once again for being here today. This is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing.
Thank you for having us, Murray.
I know, this was wonderful. What a joy to meet both of you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.